I'm pleased you can. So my name is Catherine Wilkes. I'm a practice area lead in data and analytics at a company called Slalom. We are a modern consultancy focused on strategy, business transformation and technology. So today I'm going to do a quick 20 minutes on how to enable a modern culture of data. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or if you're able to come off mute, then please do and ask questions the old-fashioned way. Okay, so just to start with, our lives are increasingly data-driven. So when you woke up this morning, you may have checked the weather on your app, probably seen the grey clouds and rain of Manchester in July. In the old days pre-lockdown, you may have checked your commute to work or checked what time your train was going to come and whether it was on time. So increasingly, our lives are being driven by data in our personal lives, but sometimes when we go into work, that isn't the same case. So data has changed the way that we do almost everything. And Forbes in 2019 said that more than 150 zettabytes, which is 150 trillion gigabytes, basically absolutely huge, of data will need analysis by 2025. So it's long been recognised that we need to find new and different ways to analyse that data. But I think more importantly, companies are beginning to really understand the value that data can bring, and that companies that embrace the use of data are seen to be more profitable. They have happier employees. They have better engagement with customers. So our clients are increasingly coming to ask us as to how they can become more data enabled, how they can embed a culture of data literacy within their organisation, and how they can engage better in their customers through the data that they collect on them. So for customers and companies that successfully embrace a culture of data, they can achieve many things. Some examples of these are on the slide here. So innovation is generally cited as one. So you can either disrupt your industry or try and avoid being disrupted. I've already mentioned customer engagement, but companies that are embracing the use of data can anticipate their customers' needs, sometimes even before the customer knows themselves, and connect deeply on them with in a personal level. Customers, you're able to identify new opportunities for your customers. You're able to be agile. So if you can use data to try and predict what's going to happen around the corner, then your organisation can adapt before that happens. On the bottom line here is people. So this is something that I think that often companies don't think about, that by becoming more data-driven and enabling a culture of data, you can inspire your employees by empowering them. Also you can attract more talented individuals to join your organisation. So we've really seen a shift recently in people looking for work and them really wanting to work for companies that are using data effectively, that are using cutting-edge tools and analysis techniques, and the benefits that can bring. Scale and efficiency, and then also revenue growth as well, are some of the examples that we often see with companies that are embracing data and have a data-enabled culture. So what do I mean when I talk about a modern culture of data? Well, each organisation should have their own definition of what a modern culture of data means to them. But typically what we see is that a modern culture of data is an environment of experimentation, one of empowerment, of curiosity, critical thinking and collaboration. And I think some of the important points to draw out there are experimentation and empowerment. So for organisations that have really embraced a modern culture of data, they have got rid of the notion that if you try something and it doesn't work out, that it's a bad thing. Employees are encouraged to try analysis, to try things out, see if they work. And if they don't work, that's fine. You've proved it and you can move on. So, companies that have a modern culture of data are doing away with culture. critical thinking and collaboration as well. So companies that are embracing a modern culture of data, we see increased collaboration between teams. And from a data point of view, that's incredibly powerful when you start to combine data across the organization and teams working collaboratively across the organization. And that's when you can really start to see change and see some really, really interesting results with data. So this slide shows Uber, long been known as a disruptor within our ecosystem, along with Netflix and some of the other players, such as Amazon. So I'm going to tell you a client story about a client that we've been working with, which in this instance is not Uber, but it's actually a company that was potentially being disrupted by Uber. So our client is Avis, the car hire people. And they have about 650,000 vehicles globally. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to make renting cars as easy and painless as possible for their customers. So they really felt the pain of Uber and Lyft and some of the other players in the market who were making it incredibly easy for customers to just hail a cab, essentially, rather than hire a car when they're out of town. So Avis recognised that, and what they wanted to do was to build a connected fleet of vehicles. So traditionally, they were leasing cars to customers essentially on a first-come, first-served basis, which was meaning that there was sometimes a risk of poor customer service if they were giving a vehicle that was perhaps a little bit older. And it meant that they couldn't give customers their preferences as well. But also there were operational inefficiencies associated with that. So they approached Slalom and we supported them building out an AWS technology stack to support with this and using machine learning to optimize their fleet of vehicles. So here's an example of exactly what we did. Here's a chart here of a snapshot of a vehicle fleet for one of their depots. And you can see along the horizontal axis the age of vehicles in days, and along the vertical axis the mileage on each vehicle. And in order for Avis to operate in an efficient way, their vehicles should closely align to the curve so that the older vehicles had more mileage on them. But you can see that there's a number of vehicles that are either quite old but have a low mileage, which obviously is not very efficient from a usage point of view, or are younger but also have a higher mileage. So this machine learning algorithm that we supported them to build would identify the right car for that individual based on the combination of the vehicle age and the mileage, and also customer preferences. So we built them the machine learning model, but also an application that sat on their tills that the booking clerks used, so that when a customer came in, they had a seamless experience. And how this worked was that vehicles were prioritised, and that prioritisation was a colour coding. So the top priority was with blue lane cars. So when these came in from hire, these were the cars that had priority to lease out to other customers as quickly as possible. So these were prioritised for cleaning and servicing, maintenance, etc. And then they sat in the blue lane, and then when the next customer came in, they were number one for being assigned, through to the lowest priority, which were the red cars. So perhaps these were the ones where a customer had had a complaint about the vehicle earlier, or where they were an older car with older car with a low mileage. No, sorry, with a higher mileage, for example. So this not only helped them with an operational efficiency point of view, but also helped with customer service because they were being given an optimal vehicle for them. And Avis estimated that through this piece of work, they could look to save around $40 million in the first year. So a huge cost saving, but more importantly, I think, we had helped them to demonstrate internally that by using some of these new tools and techniques and some data analytics, they could make a huge improvement. And their employees were happy because they were learning something new as well. So we believe that a modern culture of data is enabled by 5 key elements, and the visual on the right here explains what they are. So at the centre is a bold vision, and really this bold vision should be linked to your strategy as a company, because you know, gone are the days when companies would have a separate business strategy or corporate strategy and then a data strategy or digital strategy. You know, now it's all in one. And whatever you're doing from a data point of view really needs to align to your strategic objectives as a company. And you need to be really, really clear on what that vision is. And then whatever you're doing from a data or technology point of view needs to be building towards achieving that vision. And then the 4 areas around the edge. So you have ways of working. So how do you need to operate as a company so that you can really embed this culture of data, so that you can have insights in your behavior and your operations? So do you need to structure an analytics team, you know, in a hybrid manner, for example? Are you going to have business partnering? So how are you going to work as a company to enable this modern culture of data? Next is guardianship. So this is a newer terminology for governance, which is a slightly more positive slant on governance. So how are you going to establish trust in your data, in your tools and your practices? And that's trust both from an employee point of view, but also from a customer point of view. And this is something actually that we're seeing an awful lot of interest in at the moment, and data governance. Next is data literacy. So how can you encourage a mindset within your employees that and the skills that drive action? So how can you develop a workforce and teams that can live and breathe data, that have the right skills to be able to perform their roles, that, you know, where everybody has access to data, that can perform simple analysis in data as well, and that can really understand the importance of keeping data safe within the organisation and using data as well. And lastly is access and transparencies. So what systems do you need to build so you can have access to the right data? They need to be flexible, they need to be scalable, and they need to have the right access. So it's important to consider people within your organisation when you're trying to build a modern culture of data. Of course, what makes up your culture is primarily your people within your organisation. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So where we tend to see customers succeed the most is in when they use a tailored approach and they segment their teams into different types of knowledge workers within their culture. So these may span from, for example, data scientists who use stats and machine learning methods to perform advanced analysis. They're highly skilled. They will likely be coding in Python or R. And you know, they will want to be head down, have access to all of the data that they need at their fingertips. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you typically have a consumer who will consume dashboards or reports or analysis. They will form conclusions on their own and often have a great deal of knowledge about the business, but won't necessarily want to be slicing and dicing data themselves or be coding. And if you're trying to build a modern culture of data, then you need to think about how the tools and techniques and communications that you're issuing need to be tailored towards each of the different knowledge worker types within your organisation. So I have another example here of a client that we worked with, and this is the American Cancer Society. So there's been a lot of interesting stories in the press recently about this type of work. And that is around AI outperforming doctors diagnosing breast cancer. And that's exactly the challenge that we were helping the American Cancer Society with last year. So since the 80s, the American Cancer Society has collected data and tissue samples from almost 200,000 patients. And the challenge is these tissue samples are physical tissue samples from individuals. The American Cancer Society had almost 2,000 breast cancer tissue samples from women. And the ACS wanted to leverage the data to understand what additional factors are related to breast cancer. So factors such as the weight and height of the individual, their demographic information, any lifestyle choices and medical history. And then also what impact that has on the survival rate of that individual. So they had highly trained pathologists who can perform this work, but it takes a long time. And they estimated that to go through the 1,700 tissue samples, that it would take around 3 years. And so we partnered with the American Cancer Society, and we used Google this time. And we developed a Google Cloud machine learning engine specifically to run through these samples. Now, one of the challenges that we had with this is that these were physical samples. So we needed to find a way to flatten those samples into an actual file format that could be read by the machine learning engine. So that was a challenge we worked with Google and ACS to be able to successfully solve. And the driver for the American Cancer Society for this pilot was around speed. Accuracy was obviously a consideration, but the main factor for them at this point was speed, because they recognized that it would take around 3 years for somebody to analyze all of these samples. And through the machine learning algorithm that we built for the ACS, we analysed the 1,700 tissue samples within a 3-month period. So you can see that, definitely were able to demonstrate that by using machine learning techniques, the American Cancer Society could increase their efficiency. But not only that, the machine learning engine was able to pick up features in the tissues that were going undetected by their experienced pathologists. So there was a gain from that side as well. So in summary, a modern culture of data, we believe is something that is critical for companies, and something that we spend a lot of time talking about and we're really, really passionate about. We believe that a modern culture of data is one of experimentation and collaboration, where everybody in an organisation has access to data. And we believe also that a modern culture of data is underpinned by 5 key elements. So having a bold vision that's aligned to your strategy, having the right ways of working in place to make this a success, having appropriate guardianship, data literacy, and then access and transparency as well. So are there any questions at all? I think we've got 5 minutes left. If you've got any questions, you can pop them in the chat, or if you're able to come off mute, I don't know if you're able to, but if you can, then you can put them in, you can say them as well. Okay, so I've got a question from Paul here around, is there a way to assess how an organisation is doing against the 5 areas? So yes, there is. I've actually recently just finished one of these in the last few weeks, which was really, really interesting. So there's many different ways you can do it. The usual way we'd recommend is through a combination of conducting a survey for employees in the organisation, so that you can reach a huge number. So we did this for one company where we surveyed over 1,000 employees globally, and then combine that with some targeted interviews with some exec leadership as well. And then what we like to do as well is display the results of that in a dashboard. And that's really, really insightful and can help an organisation to understand where they should focus their efforts against each of the 5 areas in order to increase their culture of data. Any other questions at all? Well, if you do think of any in the future, then please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.